Hey guys, it's Tyler. This is a section we're now calling Preliminary Bombardment, where I just kind of let you know what's going on. So we've recorded this at Good Games Rockingham. There was a large event going on, hence why you can hear a lot of background noise. And we are still working on the best ways to improve our audio. So one of our microphones was slightly broken. So if the audio at any point gets a bit rustly, it has nothing to do with your speakers. It is once again a problem that we are working on, and we endeavor to keep making this better and better every time. So stick around. We all think the content's pretty good, and the production qualities will just get better and better. Thanks. See you in the next one.
Welcome to the Historical Miniature Gamers Podcast. This is episode 11, and we're going to be focusing on a segment that we're calling How to Get Better at Bolt Action. Today, I have myself, Jacob.
I'm Daniel.
Gorchin.
And I'm Tyler.
So you've got the whole cast here today, and we're really just excited to get back into talking about bolts. So why don't we get straight into it? The main thing that we all want to discuss is how to get better at bolt action. I think it'd be a really good idea if you haven't checked our previous episodes before. We've just done a 2-part series on list building itself. We've got a lot of other interesting content out there about deployment and other decision makings that you'd be making within the game itself. But also we're really here to just kind of discuss our journey of becoming better at playing this game. And we've got a whole cast of various experience here. So I've been in wargaming for a couple of years. Dan's been in it through most of his life, right?
Arguably.
Yeah.
Is that like 50 years?
Just a quick intro. How long you been playing Gorchin?
So I'm probably coming on to 2 years in bolt action now, but it's probably been almost a decade of casual wargaming. Grew up playing chess and checkers and that sort of thing as well.
Fantastic. And how about you, Tyler?
I played war games when I was like 13.
Yeah.
Just
That was yesterday, right?
That was for a year or two. Then I just lost all interest during high school. Then probably been playing bolt action for probably about smack dab a year since probably started playing with skulls and stuff. So,
And just very quickly, just as an event recap, we just had an event down at Outpost 6030.
Divine Luck.
How did that go?
New Dawn.
Sorry.
Divine Luck is the one that's coming. So New Dawn. So New Dawn was an opportunistic one that we had with Outpost 6030, the ability to help facilitate running some stuff. So we actually had a lot of normal players that wanted to come, but it was just too short notice. They couldn't make it work after Christmas, but that was fine. We still had 10 people come down and have an absolute ball on the day. I changed up the format quite a bit with how things were done, and a lot of players actually found that very refreshing. If you haven't listened to the previous episode, they didn't know what missions they were going to be playing on the day. They had 2 potential army lists that they could bring to, and there was a matchup process of what people would fight with, and that allowed them to have a little bit of, I want to bring something really like super cheesy and disgusting in case my opponent does, and we'll have like the raddest, like dirtiest game. Not many people actually ended up doing that. Most people ended up just bringing lists that were generic enough across the board with a couple of elements that were quite dangerous. And then that matchup process just threw the whole thing for 6 because the missions were part of the matchup process. So it actually seemed to run pretty well. Got quite a bit of feedback on it. We'll look to see what we can do in the future on that.
One of the things that I did like about that one was the tournament scoring wasn't individual. You were cumulative to your whole team. So whether the Allies won the round or the Axis won the round. And that was actually quite interesting because normally when you come to the tournament, you're in it for yourself. But we came into round 2 or round 3, and Dan was like, Allies are down a little bit. And I'm sitting there in the next game, and it's not like, I'm not on, I think I was at 1 win, 1 loss coming into round 3. And I'm sitting there going, it's like, I need to do the best job that I can, not just for me, but just to really help bring the allies over the line. I ended up drawing that game, so I didn't do too well. but it was interesting to feel that extra tension, that extra pressure.
That pressure,
and it wasn't like stressful, it wasn't negative. You just you really felt that competitive vibe come through. So,
I mean, you're in a room full of friends there, so you're like, I really want to help build this up. No, that's really interesting. Pity I missed that event. But we got another one coming up, Divine Luck. Anything special you want to note about that?
Probably, so this is another one where Justin loves being creative with his mission packs and his mission design. So this one is, he bounced this idea. He's like, do you reckon people will go for it? I went, look, let's just put it in, because if it's early in the year, right? So if it doesn't fly, we can try and repair that relationship over the next 8 months. But what we've done is an escalation style list build, and that has thrown a real spanner in the works for most of the players. In fact, at least 2 on this table. And then, because normally in an escalation list, you'll go, right, your final position will be 1250, so build a 1250 point list. But we're also going to do lead up, so build a 750 and build a 1000 or something like that. Justin's gone a step further to go, yes, that's true, but you can't, anything you're using in that 750 and 1000 point list can't be added or subtracted. So in terms of, and right down to war gear, number of models, and veterancy. So all of your, essentially everything that you have to play at 750 will exist in exactly the same form at your 1250 point list.
And at your 1000.
And at your 1000 point list.
Genius. I honestly love that.
It's made it really, I've already had a few comments back going like, I like this, but I hate this. Like, this is just so hard. Because people are having to go, normally at 1250, I would go this, and this. And then when they scale,
decision you make.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then when they scale it back to go, what would I fit into my 750 list? They go, triangle, square hole, doesn't go in, like doesn't fit.
And this week's been a little bit more relaxed for me for some other commitments and a few other distractions. So I spent the majority of this week just musing about different sort of list builds that I would put in. I didn't put anything down on paper just to get some rough ideas of what I would do. And so I sat down yesterday, I was like, cool, I think I'm happy with this. I've looked at the missions enough. I've looked at the list and my potential options, and I put some constraints in, like, no, my list has to be this style, and I'm going to learn to play this style. And I remember I sat down yesterday and I was like, I'll just spit out these lists in 20 minutes. I've been thinking about them all week. Yeah. And I said, and it was still 1.5 hours later, I'm sitting there, I've got my 750, my 1000, my 1250, I've got the mission pack, I've drawn out strategies for the missions that I'm playing, and I'm going, do I want my howitzer in the first round? Do I need him in the first round? Or do I need him in the second round? Or can I just delay to the third round? And it ended up being like a 1250 list that I was pretty happy with. And then a 1,000 point list, and I just realized that when I started taking those items out, I was way below 1,000. I was clocking in at like 900 points, which wasn't quite the hamstring that I wanted to put myself on. And so I ended up having to keep changing my 1250 list to give myself a list that was more scalable. And so it was really fun and really challenging, but I'm going to play test a little bit, and then once I'm happy with it, I'm actually going to do the same thing that I did for November Skulls, is I will go through my entire process. I'm going to put a post up, all of the lessons, all the rights, all the wrongs, and because when I did that, we actually had a really good discussion, and I learned a lot from other people's inputs and other people's perspectives, and I hope that other people did as well. I got some private feedback. People said it was really good content, so I'm going to do the same thing again. And I will also stay true to my word. There were some really good suggestions in that came up in that thread that I really wanted to take, but that wasn't the point. The point wasn't community list building. I wasn't crowdsourcing my list and crowdsourcing my strategies. And my point was, I was trying to get what everybody does in silence and in isolation and make it transparent, but not necessarily use the advantage of that. And I will accept the disadvantage that some people might build to counter my list, but we play Axis versus Allies, and there might be a blue on blue round. And if every Axis player is specifically building to verse my list, they are probably hamstringing themselves. And we've talked about this before. List building's not as big of a component in bolt action as it is in other war games. So I'll take the minor hamstring, and I think it's going to be really good.
So thinking back, would have started at the 750 and just kept upgrading?
No. It's
Well, the problem with that is you build your 750 list, you go, yep, no worries. So now, when you go to your 1,000-point list, you've only got 250 points that you can allocate, and you can't touch any of your existing squads.
Yeah.
So then when you get to your 1,250-point list, you have the same conundrum again. So when you can't, if you build at the 1,250 down, you can at least scope in the things that you want to function at 1,250.
Yeah.
But then you lose those scoping requirements at the front end. So it is very much a case of you can go either way, but it's going to bite you either way you do it.
So what was the thought process with Justin? Was this like, this is your units that are going further and further within the war and they're getting reinforcements attached onto them? Is that...
I'm actually not entirely sure. He may have just fallen down and hit his head. Genuinely, Justin, like me, has been involved in the hobby for a long time, and so has seen a lot of different ways of doing the rules, doing mission types, doing breakdowns. He's been part of Outpost for a long period of time as well. So he has seen a lot of different things. I know with 40K, they used to run escalation style leagues and events and things like that. And so some of this formatting stuff is probably not unusual to him. But overall, largely I'm expecting that it's probably been him learning from the community of people wanting to try different things. So we have variety in our event scene and things, how they work. But then also that step further to go, okay, but how can I roll that out at an event? Because the other thing that he's done, just like when we had Partisan Pete, which was another fantastic event that ran through, we have Pastor Alfredo.
Forced to take a chaplain. For free.
A free chaplain. Yep.
Cancel on dice cap, but he's free.
Yep. So essentially if we've got I think the dice cap for this one's set at 15 or 14?
It's
I can't remember.
10, 12, 14.
10, 12, 14.
So 10 at 750, 12 at 1,000.
But of course, Mr. Alfredo takes up a dice cap at every single one of those points.
Wow.
So you now have, and he doesn't take any points up necessarily, but it means that everyone's list is going to be 9 dice, essentially at 750, because most people are going to be like, I want 9 dice, because I want 9 dice when I go to 1250. So you're all going to go that way. Meanwhile, Alfredo just sits there and everyone's going to have one, and he's got slightly modified rules to work for the event a little bit better as a chaplain, but largely it's a case of when he gets his order dice, a unit within a certain distance on a 4+, they automatically can drop a pin and essentially be inspired to then, when they go to do their order, they are down that pin. So it's not actually game breaking in my opinion. Getting him for free possibly, but everyone's getting him for free, so it's sort of it mitigates
Equally
that point.
broken.
Look, we are benevolently equally distributing these bonuses that are completely unbalanced, but you're all getting it, so it's fine.
So speaking of balance and broken, one of the things that's caused a little bit of a stir recently was the new FAQ that came out.
Yes.
And that was actually quite an interesting thing to see. A lot of times it has been quite correctly summarized that, like, if you just read the rulebook, you didn't need that, the big surprising part of the FAQ. But I think that sort of glosses over some of the details in the way the different communities read. So there was some unit cost that changed, like native irregulars went up to 13 points base, I think, which curtails that a lot. There's a few other things about their selectors was corrected, so you won't see that as much. We didn't see that so much in the Perth meta. I've only come across it once on all the tournament lists, and it was actually quite a challenging list. But it was one of those things that you sort of go, okay, after a couple of turns, you see how it works. You sit in that damage control, and you're like, okay, I can start building some momentum now and do something about it. But the main thing that really hit a lot of people for 6, it seems, particularly in the American community, was that unless a unit specifically said it in its entry in its campaign book or theater book, you couldn't take it in a generic reinforced platoon. And so basically that meant if you found new units that didn't say you could take in a generic reinforced platoon, or said you could only take them in the theater selector, is what they meant, and units that didn't have either meant you could only take them in the theater selector. And so a lot of us here in Perth particularly were playing off that mentality anyway, and because basically, like, bolt action's a permissive rule set, right?
Yeah, I mean, when you're playing any sort of game, there's always a level of interpretation and social contract, as we know. When you get down, you sit together and agree with your opponent. By and large, that agreement to do something different to what the rules say always takes precedence, because you're playing your game with your friend.
Especially
that's
if
the way
there's
it
a TO
goes.
involved.
Especially. But there are some things where if the rules specifically then clarify a direction, to then go against that direction, it isn't necessarily the level of cheating. You're not necessarily cheating for advantage, and I wouldn't put that on anyone. But you are breaking the rules. So it's important to understand you can actually break the rules without the intent, desire to cheat. That they are actually separate things.
Without malicious intent.
That's right. Yeah. But you do essentially break the rules at that point. Now, so yeah, the selectors one is a classic, and that's been doing the rounds since version 1.
Yeah.
Like it's not a new thing. Some of the players might be experiencing it for the first time, but this is actually not a new thing. And all the previous indications by Warlord and even by Alessandra, who's trying to get the information out to simply go, and it's like, just everyone take a chill pill for a second. Like it's
Tiger fear.
It's about playing a game, and it's about having fun. And if your version of what fun looks like in your group is different, that's actually okay, because you're playing the game and having fun. I'll say my scene, but it's our scene in Perth. Very, very early when I was kickstarting it, I actually wrote a statement in the players pack explaining why I wasn't allowing certain types of units from the theatre selector rules. And I wrote that in there because I wanted to be abundantly clear. It's not because all of these units are particularly broken, because they're not.
Yeah.
It's not because I don't want to include anything fun. It's simply because when you open the door to some of these things, you also open the door to things that are not fun, the things that are not okay, the things that can be stretched out. And I know I've pointed out in the podcast before, and I'm not trying to, again, I don't want to discourage this kind of list from being played in our events, but having nothing but bamboo spearmen in a Japanese list, right? It's popular because of how it works on the battlefield. There's a little bit of historic inspiration on it. But when you look at the theatre selectors, where those units are available in the theatre selectors, I think it's like 1 or 2 units. It's not an entire army necessarily of these things. And the same goes for a few other things. But in terms of whether you can or can't take something, in my mind, the rule still is go have the conversation with the TO or go have a conversation with your friend. In most cases, like for example, the early war French, they are specifically just called out in their theatre book. They don't have their own army book. The France has an army book, but not the early war France changes. And so if you're saying no to theatre selectors or theatre books, you're essentially going, well, you can't play them. You can't play nationalist Chinese. They don't exist anymore. You can't, like, that just strikes me as silly. But the reality is that if your TO, for whatever reason, is going, no, to ensure an element of balance, we're saying rulebook units only, even. Just straight out of the list in the rulebooks. You don't get minor nations at all. But the reality is, if that's what your TO is wanting to do and can justify the reasons why he would like to do that and make sure that everyone comes and has a good time, this is all a moot point, effectively.
This topic has existed for a long time online with bolt action, and it took me a while to actually come to this, where the decision making is correct. I didn't agree with it at first. I'm talking way back when we had the Western Desert stuff. That's just on me because I bought way too many models. But I think the main problem with newcomers coming into the game is the reliance on Easy Army itself. It is such a great resource to build your army in no time. It's free. You can get all of your special rules printed out for the most part. Mostly it's accurate. The main problem it has is that it allows those theatre units to be put within a generic reinforced platoon. And that actually might be by design, based on which sort of events you're playing at and all that kind of thing. For a long time I've been thinking, they really should update that, but that might not actually be the intent.
I would also be very hesitant to, like me personally, I'd be very hesitant to go out to, I think the guy's Greg, who sort of runs it, and essentially be like, hey dude, I want you to change all this because that conforms to how I think the world should run. I'm sort of like, I can recommend a change or I can suggest a change, but the reality is that if Greg even thinks it's relevant, he will do something about it. If not, he'll go, people are here to play games and have fun, and if that's what they're doing, then that's what they're doing. If the TOs want to use it, then they can use it. Like, it's, again, if you're clear with what you're doing and what you're saying, a lot of this will go away. But I love Easy Army. I think it's I've used multiple list selectors. I generally carry a pen around with me and paper all the time. I've tried that as well, but it makes it very simple to get things together. And the only thing I would stress with any of those list building apps or list building abilities, or even writing it on paper yourself, you are not the rule book. So always make sure you check with the rule book. And that's all I would say on it. How you interpret or agree to interpret the rule book with your friends, that's then a joint decision. And you make what decision is right for you guys. But if you're going to an event, the TO's got the say. That's just the way it goes.
Let's take a break.
Okay, so one of the things that we've done a lot at HMG is we've talked a lot about different concepts and we've talked a lot about the game at a particularly abstract level. One of the things that I really thought that we could do and really want to do with this particular episode is give our viewers something to take home. And I think that there's a lot of viewers on our wings, particularly and yourself, Tyler, and some of the other people on the cast who really want to
What are you trying to say?
get better at Baltic. Well, this is a conversation that we had. Right?
Yeah, no, absolutely,
Yeah,
100%.
yeah. And so one of the things that I was hoping to do here was to kind of lay out a strategy of some things that the players can do to get better at bolt action. And I'm not sitting here pontificating because I'm the best player in the state, and that's far from the truth. The only thing that where I'm coming from in this one is that there's a lot of different skills that I've undertaken and I've mapped out, and I'm really passionate about the learning process that people go through as students. And so one of the things that I want to talk to our viewers about and have a conversation with each other as well is what are the steps that you can take, what's the mentality that you need to have, and sort of what's the order of operations that you might need to undertake to get better at something. And we're going to use bolt action as a case study in this one. Now, the important preface here is that for you to be a player in bolt action or a player at a tournament, you must, let me try that again. There is absolutely no requirement for you to actually want to get better. That's not necessary. And one of the things that's really important, particularly about any hobby that you undertake, regardless of whether it's miniatures or otherwise, but it becomes more prevalent in miniatures because there's a lot of rub between different skill levels and different interests, is that don't if you paint because it's fun, fantastic. You don't have to try to get better at painting for it to be enjoyable. It's not necessary and it's not sufficient. The only thing that is necessary is that you enjoy it. And if you find that trying to get better at something is detracting from your enjoyment, then it's actually perfectly okay to go, you know what, that's actually not for me. I'm just here to have fun. And that also means you shouldn't then exclude yourself from tournament play either. Right?
Yeah.
Tournament play is not specifically for the competitive, it's just where those players who are interested in that can flex those muscles and really just hone that edge.
I think that's unique though. Like when I think tournament play within the only other system that I seem to talk about, Warhammer 40k, like it's tournaments are completely uberly competitive. Like people are bringing their A game, they're there. Like I want to destroy all 3 of my matches, like cheese that, like nuts off kind of thing.
Unfortunately, First Blood is a little bit like that as well. That's supposed to be sort of the beginner
introduction.
Introductory to the tournament scene happens early on in the year. And one of the things that I find is that a lot of really top end players, perhaps maybe not the top 10 percentile, but the top quartile, will actually play off lists or try new strategies at First Blood. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it's perhaps not the target audience of that.
Well, that's probably how you blood someone for the tournament, slobbing that you get sometimes in 40k tournaments.
That doesn't happen in our bolt action events at all.
No. But and sure, there are people who take full bamboo spear lists, or
submit them to the TO at least.
Try to get them into the tournaments. But I think for me, the scene itself, like tournaments are there to play. You're playing more competitively, but you're playing. I've never been like, man, that was trash. I've been seal clubbed. Even when I first started, I think it was my 4th game ever I played. I started playing in a tournament, and I won it. But it's just really interesting looking at the different mentalities within tournament scenes.
It's just how you've developed the scene here, because it's completely different. Because we've had conversations with back when during the lockdown, Gordon. He's very much into the mentality of what we would see within a competitive 40k player.
Completely min-maxed. Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah, and
For sure.
it's just not our scene. But you'll listen to the other podcasts and you'll see that that's what it's like in the UK, but we've got it scaled back to a certain level. And it's very interesting because we have crossover between those players who also play GW games in the same location. Yet we've all kind of decided this is my game where maybe I'm relaxing, maybe I'm trying a different approach or whatever else. Interestingly enough, in my sort of progression with bolt action within the last 2 years, it's been a lot of focus on wanting to get better. And a lot of those things, it's analyzing what other players do, and then it's learning from my mistakes and seeing what I need to do to improve. But there's a point, probably before the last event that we had, that I've actually seen that it's a lot of effort to get to where I want to be. And there's a point where I've gone, actually, I kind of want to scale right here and not even go further. And that's just me because I've got interest in building this YouTube thing and, building up a club. Trying
building a club.
I wanted to host tournaments with you and that. So there's a point where I'm like, well, I could go down the competitive path and actually consistently get better. I mean, there's thought processes I'm going to have regardless if I decide to do that or not. I'm gonna get better by playing the game more often, regardless. But there's a level where you can go, I need to take this more serious, and you have a lot more thought process into what you're doing rather than going through the motions, I guess.
Yeah, I think we're actually going to touch on a lot of that as we go through these next few points that we've lined up, because I would agree. There's innately you don't have to want to get better. You like most things, through repetition you gain efficiencies. You learn the right and wrong way of doing certain things. You naturally will get better at that task. Ironically, playing a game is actually no different to that. But there is a point where you go, I'm comfortable at this level, so I don't need to strive to do things differently. And that's always an undercurrent that sits with all of this. But I think we should dive into some of the other things of so what does it mean to play better?
And so just before we get onto that, the important distinction that I want to make here is that this is not a guide for A to B. It's not a guide for displacement, getting you from where you are now to a defined X point. The thing that we're talking about here is something that's going to change your speed at progression. And these are the things that will make you better faster. And that's a really important distinction, because if you want to get really good at something, just repetition alone, just doing the thing, is not going to cut it. And this is something that I really wanted to make an important distinction on. But roughly in order of operation, the first most important thing that I would suggest that you need to have, a skill that you need to develop, is I'm just going to summarize it as fair and level self-critique. So what this means is this actually sounds kind of obtuse, but the important thing is that when you analyze, and we use the word analyze very specifically, when you analyze the events of a game or a decision after the fact, is that the first and most important thing you need to do is you need to be fair about it, because there will be a very rare instance when you do something or you make a decision and you end up having less information. Every single time you do anything, you will always have more information after you do it. And so when you critique yourself on that decision, do not critique yourself with the new information. Critique yourself on the decision with the information you had available. And that's what I talk about fair and level critique. The other things are like, you can figure out the probabilities of things within some accuracy in bolt action, because you can't pre-measure your hit chance, your conversion rate to wounds and things like that. So this is information that's available. What's also available to you, even if you're playing in a competitive environment, is asking your opponent what that unit is capable of. You don't have to be familiar with every unit in the game, but your opponent has to be familiar with their army, just like you have to be familiar with yours. And it is perfectly acceptable, I would say is actually advisable, if you don't know what a unit is capable of, you ask your opponent. If they withhold information from you, depending on which event and which scene that you're in, that might be just a bit of a frowned upon activity, or it might just be a straight no thing that you shouldn't do. And so that's what I mean by fair and level self-critique. If you don't have that, your progression will be much slower. I would consider that to be a multiplier of your progression speed. Is not just not just looking at something and going, that was the wrong decision, but go, was that actually the wrong decision? Out of every piece of information that I had available to me, was that the best decision that I could have made? And if it was, you have to let it go.
Yeah.
You cannot be outcome orientated, you must be process orientated. Because if you're outcome orientated, you might make poor decisions that have good results, and you will go, that's a decision I should continue to make.
Yeah.
Or conversely, you will make good decisions with bad rolls, or sometimes it's the best decision you could possibly make, but because it was a poor outcome, you think it was a poor decision.
Yeah.
That's not fair and level self-critique. It's actually shooting yourself in the foot.
And it's actually missing an opportunity. So if I could give an example of how that works from an in-game point of view, recently where we played the Lorraine campaign, and I was up against Carter Jackson, one of our quite good up-and-coming players. Now, these scenarios were a little bit lopsided by design, and I had, we were playing point defense, he was on defense and I was attacking. Now, he had probably a good 50% of his army, all of his infantry in reserve, and he was defending on 2 of the objectives. So the third one, I'd already figured I can get there with a tracked vehicle with some troops in it. I can hold that one. He had nothing over there. Unlikely he's going to commit a reserve to that if I'm pushing really hard on the other 2. On one of them, I basically put 2 Panzer IVs and then just started bombing the objective into oblivion. And I was like, I'll send someone up there to capture that later. But I ran essentially a German half-track and troops up to the third objective, which was his bottom right corner. Yeah, and again, he had all of his stuff in reserve, and I had got my dice out first, so I had to commit to move on to that objective. We were getting towards the end of the turn. I was like, I have to make a move now. I wasn't owning it at that point, but I had to make a move towards it to either A, draw out his reserves onto that flank so that I wouldn't have to worry about getting gotcha'd on the other. But if I didn't move fast enough, I wasn't going to get there to be able to hold it, and he was going to hold it, and I was going to have to fight it off him, and that was just not going to happen. As it turned out, he failed his reserve rolls on all the units that needed to come on that turn in particular. So that gave me an extra turn's worth of breathing space, but that outcome is not why I should have made the decision. The outcome is that I needed to put pressure on that objective, and that's what I'd made as the decision to move forward with.
Yeah. That sort of touches on something else, is this concept of analysis that we've danced around a little bit. You know, when we've talked about a list building in the previous couple of episodes, you guys have really pulled apart all of the things all of the things you can think about when you make a list. But the important thing is analysis in and of itself is a skill. If you're talking about a unit, if you're talking about a list, if you're talking about a series of events that have happened. If your analysis of a unit goes, that's really powerful, and it ends there, that's not an analysis, that's an opinion. And so the important thing with an analysis is that you have to stay on things that are factual, and you can provide evaluation. This is powerful, this is cost efficient, this is economical, but I would submit that you can only do that at the very end. Right? If you look at guys who value real estate or guys who want to buy cars or other stuff, they come to that dollar value at the end, and that's a valuation, that's an analysis of all of the factors. And it's the same thing that you need to do. If you find that unit is BS or that unit is OP, that might be an accurate opinion, but until you've actually gone through all the steps and goes, well, let's talk about something that's overpowered. What is its damage output compared to everything else on that curve? For its points cost, for its mobility, for its survivability, for its veterancy. All of those things together will allow you to analyze a unit. And same when it comes to a list. And same when it comes to missions, right? When you've performed a series of actions and you get to sort of the end of a mission, or the end of a game, you will find that the decisions at the end are very easy to analyze because there's much fewer branches, right? You go, I shouldn't have, just like in the game that I played at November Skulls against Jackson, the difference between a win or a loss, the win and the, actually no, I did lose that one. The difference between that one and a draw, right at the very end, was I stood my Sherman and I shot at a down unit because kill points were worth a little bit. Instead, what I should have done is a unit of Finns that was like 3 of them left on like 6 pins, should have just tank shot right through them. right? And not only would that have most likely scored me the kill point, but it would have put my tank in his quarter, and that would have been a difference of gaining 1 victory point to potentially gaining 4.
Yeah.
And that's because there was no decision making in that process. And that sounds really weird to say out loud.
Got a little bloodthirsty, did we?
Absolutely. Right? And so, the things you need fair level self-critique. You need to be able to analyze things, not just decisions, but units and lists and missions and build strategies. So the important thing about the analysis is why you think that, not just what you think, but why you think it. The last one that I would really sort of hammer home, that I think a lot of people don't realize they have, is that in your head, for every decision you make, you have a decision flow chart. You might not be consciously aware of it, but you have one. And the best thing that you can do to rapidly increase how much faster, how much better and at what speed you're getting at bolt action is to actually analyze and build a decision-making profile. And so that would be for different actions. You would have one for shooting. You would have one for moving. You would have one for going down. Exactly. Yeah. Each one of those individual things. And then once you have these little short ones that are confined, they will start merging together. And what you'll see is Dan, you're kind of an example of this at the other end. Because you understand all the moving parts, you know that no decision-making process without sufficient criteria is actually possible, right? Because we've talked about this a lot, and you guys might have seen Dan talk about, like the list building one's a great example. Dan's like, there's an exception to that. Yeah. There's a case where that's not right. And yes, that's because Dan's got such an excellent understanding of all the mechanics that his decision-making process is not a flow chart, it's a ball of yarn. But he knows how it all fits together. And I would,
it's like a Rubik's Cube, and I have to orientate it a certain way to get the bit of information that I need.
Yeah, exactly. And whereas
it's
a lot
like such a backhanded compliment. There's so much info, but it's just there.
But for us, it looks like a ball of yarn. Yeah. Dan knows where all the connections are. We don't. And so I would encourage players, don't try to build a ball of yarn that's capable of Dan's level of analysis. It's just make simple ones for your simple steps. The shooting one is a really simple one. What is your chance to hit? What's your chance to convert? So how many hits are you going to get? How many wounds are you going to get? And how many pins are you going to apply? And most importantly with that's a great place to start because it teaches you that math hammer that you guys mentioned, the strict definition of math hammer instead of the list
fluffy
building
one
ones.
that I use.
Yeah, and so if you take your base hit chance of 3, right? That's 2/3 of your shots, 66% is going to go through. Base chance of regulars is 50%. So if you're shooting with 10 guys, you're going to get 6 hits, you're going to get 3 kills, and you're going to apply 1 pin unless you're using a special weapon. That's some envelope or napkin math that most people should get pretty familiar with if you're trying to get better at bolt action. Because lethality in bolt action is quite fluffy. It's very cloudy. There are some cases where, you will target a unit and you go, well, this should actually really hurt, and then you don't get any damage out. And then you look back at the probabilities and go, oh, there was a 1 in 6 chance I was going to kill 1 guy. I thought that was going to be way more powerful. And that will help you be better at analysis. Same with movement. You've got to ask yourself, what's the position that I'm in? What's the position that I want to be in? What am I exposing myself to in that process? An ambush, terrain, how many turns is it going to take me to get there? And eventually, once you have all of these little ones, you'll be able to start putting them together. Is it worth me moving within ½ inch to get the neg 1 to shoot? No, because the probability is the same. Unless you're Americans, unless you're using SMGs, some things like that. And now you start realizing that your decision-making, very abstract, what happens to the math for shooting if I move closer, becomes very simple and becomes very transparent. And I think that's the important thing, is you want to remove the opacity from the game mechanics.
I find another one, while we're on the topic of flowcharts and stuff, is we learned it when I was doing martial arts and stuff. It's like interrupting your opponent's rhythm. So a big one when I was doing sword fighting and stuff was a lot of people would stamp their foot really loud to kind of try and break up someone's rhythm before going in for a combo or something.
Yeah.
And for me, it's the same thing. And you've talked about it plenty of times of breaking your opponent's pattern, breaking their flowchart. So doing something, and it's that chess example of like some grandmaster, like his entire game plan was thrown out because one guy made a mistake early on, and he's like, "What is this guy seeing that I'm not seeing?" Like, and if you manage to get in your opponent's head, like, you've already won. You're sitting there and, well, I shouldn't say you've already won, but it helps a lot, like, when you have that. And
And interestingly enough, the flowcharts are a great way to stop you from hemorrhaging your OODA loop. So the thing we talked about, interrupting your opponent's OODA loop. If you find yourself in OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, and act. Some fighter pilot in the 70s came up with it, and he was a killer fighter pilot, and he ended up training a whole bunch of other excellent fighter pilots. I think it was Lieutenant John Boyd. Fantastic. Go read about the OODA loop. We've talked about it before. But the thing is, if you find yourself caught in that, the best thing you can do is go, what's my flowchart? Because you need, every time you pull out an order dice, is you need to make a decision. And if you need to make a decision, you have to run through your flowchart. And while it might be a little bit callous, you can actually ask your opponent, give me a moment to actually think about this. Let me think this through. Because some opponents, some will be malicious about it, some not, will keep talking to you and will keep talking about stuff to try to distract you and interrupt your OODA loop. Again, it's part of the social experience.
He's on to me.
But I don't know if, I'm not going to sit here and accuse anybody. I don't think anybody's actually doing it maliciously. But these are things that happen. And sometimes you actually have to just put up a wall and go, hang on, give me 2 minutes to actually think this through and make a decision. And so that's really important, is once you realize, you have that level of critique, you've developed that analysis skill, and if you can apply those things to your decision-making chart, you will find that you will be able to learn bolt action without actually playing a game. And all of these three things come together into this concept that I call intentional practice, which I'm sure I've farted a lot on the podcast, is this idea that it's not about just playing the game. It's not about just practicing. It's having intentional practice. What is the thing that you're actually trying to practice? What is it that you're trying to get better at? The beautiful thing about intentional practice is you can apply it after the fact. You can have a casual game and have all the fun in the world, and as long as you remember most of the high points, you can take your intentional practice time and go through every single one of those decisions. And this goes under what you're talking about earlier. Like, this is a lot of work. It's a lot of effort because you're consciously, you're thinking about how you're thinking, which, dare I say it, is probably what philosophy is. And if the great way to lose your audience is start talking, is use the P word. It's a great way to lose your audience. But that's ultimately what you're doing. Is you're thinking
Stay with us. Stay with us.
Almost there.
Is you're thinking about how you're thinking, and that's really challenging. And it doesn't come easily to anybody.
No.
And that in and of itself is a skill.
I mean, this is all fantastic advice for, I guess, pre-game thought, what you're going to come into the next match with.
Yeah.
But I would like to actually have some discussion with you guys on how to best analyze the game you just had, because naturally you think of the outcomes. This tank died here. Was that a good decision? Maybe I won't play it that way next time. Whereas that might not necessarily be right, because it may have been the dice, it may have been... It probably made sense to actually commit to that move before the dice roll happened,
And that's probably where, if we take it into the first step of a game being deployment, that is straight up, in terms of things you can learn how to practice with wargaming, bolt action specifically, one of the quickest areas to develop, to become a better player, is to understand your deployments. And now we did a whole deployment episode on some of the different types and things you can do and things to think about, but putting it into practice, and as Gorchin says, you have to do it with intent. Sometimes that means you need to risk doing something you weren't comfortable doing with before to find out whether that in fact actually plays to your favor. And that isn't necessarily just doing things with outflank. Everyone immediately goes, reserve and outflank is the way to get around deployment. It's not. That is not the only way you can manipulate
It's a very fundamental part of deployment.
Oh, it's critical.
But the thing is, reserve and outflank are part of deployment.
Yes.
They're not a way to get out of deployment.
That's right.
They actually add a lot of complexity to it.
Yes, they do. And it's things like, for example, if you have mobile assets that are within your force, either armored cars, half tracks, tanks, anything on wheels, transports, anything like that, that is able to maneuver quickly, you could do essentially the refused flank move, but a turn later than deployment. So you can just put them on the right-hand side, rest your army center and left. Those things can move faster than anything in your army. And if your opponent loads up that flank, just run them behind your army. Like it sounds really simple, but that's actually, you need to actually practice to make that work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because if you think you're just going to do it, and I've done it before, when you think you're just going to do it, and then you go, you get to the point where you're like, now I'm going to move all this stuff over here, and then if you move this stuff first and your transport's stuck in behind, or if they're threatened, you move them earlier. But if you do that last, you're generally okay. Me, with my big brain plan, was like, I'm going to move them first, zip them in front of my army, and my opponent's like, cool, just shot them up.
It's very interesting, the redeployment, figures that can move fast, anything with special rules. I've played around with it a little bit. It's actually twice as hard to do so, because you now need a plan of, is it going this way, is it going that way?
Twice as many decisions, twice as many chances to make a mistake.
And you're not just thinking on that unit, because then how that unit affects the other deployments, where they're going, and all that kind of stuff.
So you're talking about post-game analysis?
Yes.
Yeah, my strongest suggestion would be follow through a simple set of questions in this one. What was I trying to achieve? When was I trying to achieve it? How was I trying to achieve it, i.e. what units was I using to do it, and why was I trying to do that in the first place? Generally, you will find your biggest mistakes will be the first question. What was I trying to do in the first place? And generally what happens is people will, you want to say roast-ended goggles or something, people will change that intent after the fact. You got to be honest with yourself. What was I trying to do by shooting at Jackson's unit? I was trying to kill it. I wasn't trying to score a victory point. I was trying to kill it.
That's right.
Because why was I doing it? Was to kill the unit. If why was to score a victory point, I would have just run over the unit. Because even if I didn't kill them, I would still be up 2 victory points net total. And so these are the things you have to ask yourself. What was I trying to do? When was I trying to do it? Because as you said, Dan, if you're trying to refuse a flank with a redeployment, if you do that too early, game's up. Or even worse, you put them out in the open when they should have had something to cover. And then how was I trying to do it? If you're trying to use a single MMG to shoot a squad of 10 veterans in cover, stop wasting everybody's time. Just stop
putting it politely.
It's like, stop doing administrative dice rolls. But this goes back to, if everything else had activated, you needed to put a pin on that unit because it might get them to fail, then that's the best decision you had, and you weren't wasting anybody's time. But this is the thing that we talked about.
If that was your opener move for the turn, and you go, really?
It's like thanks. We all know how rolling dice works. Because that's all that you achieved is you've just picked up some dice and you've rolled. You haven't actually made an impact on the game.
You get the disappointed look as well when you realize that 7s on 5 dice is literally what always feels like exactly the same as 7 on 10 dice. It's just not really going to happen that much. So funny.
So when we talked about all of these different skills, it's important to then break that down to different areas of the game that you want to get better at. I think it's a really great idea to sit there and go, I want to get better at bolt action, but that very quickly becomes an insurmountable challenge. Because as we just talked about, there are so many different angles you can take on this, there are so many different areas of the game. So instead, what I would probably encourage everyone to do, whether it's with bolt action or with anything else, but is actually just segment and section out all of the different individual skills. If you're talking about painting miniatures, break it all down into individual skills and individual techniques. That's what I'm doing, and I've found much more progress in recent times than I have in the many years before that. And so there'll be a picture somewhere. That was a fantastic workshop, by the way. So the elements of the game that we've touched on, but there's sort of 6 that I would really consider to be the defined sections. That's deployment, which includes reserving and outflank, what you're going to put and where. Target selection, so that's going, I'm going to activate this unit, what is it they're going to shoot at. The next one is scoring objectives. It sounds really weird for that one to come third, but the first to allow you to do the third. And they're not in a strict order, but objectives in these games usually boil down to hold an area or kill something. And sometimes it's temporarily hold an area and then run away.
And typically you want to commit to the final parts of those towards the end of the mission. So you need to get your position
if it's
right
not
and your selection.
cumulative. Yeah. And so then the next one is damage control, which is something that I really tried to focus on in New Dawn. Let's get that right. In New Dawn, is this idea that when you're losing, don't keep losing. And so I know that sounds really obvious to say out loud.
This is my problem.
It makes so much sense.
There we go, internet. Just get good.
Yeah, in short. And I'm not sitting here saying this because I'm particularly good at any one of these things, but these are just individual areas. Is that when you've given up a couple of victory points, rather than, and if you think that the game's not winnable, I would probably ask you to challenge that mentality. But the second important thing is don't give up any more victory points.
Yes.
Don't make the lead bigger.
Yeah.
Because damage control works both ways. If you've built a lead, use your damage control skills to not lose that lead, not shorten it. And so that damage control is really important, and it's actually a skill that a lot of people don't realize is evident in bolt action.
If I might just quickly speak on that, because that was actually very evident. The players in New Dawn that helped their team by managing their damage control in those games that were very close. And so, it was the margins in those games and in those rounds overall. When it started, I think the Axis players were up by 12 points. Then it was tournament overall. And then tournament overall round 2, the Allied players had reduced that to 8 points in the lead. And so the players are matching up with, against the next players, but they're starting to go, all right, this unit got absolutely destroyed last time. I've got to be more careful with that. I've got to hold that up. In the third round of 4, they'd reduced that lead to 1 point because they've been able to really just control that. And at this point, as a TO, I was ecstatic. I was like, this is great. They've got a chance to come back and pull it all together. Unfortunately, that did not happen. The Axis did win the event, but that was in terms of a larger scale, but it was absolutely them controlling that damage and trying to go, if I'm going to draw or lose, how can I minimize the impact and damage? You also see it in a lot in campaign games or linked campaign play where, you have to sustain your losses that you take. And so people are a lot more hesitant about overly committing something because if it goes, it doesn't come back.
The next point is identifying mistakes that your opponent has made and identifying them as opportunities and being able to seize them. That's something that's going to come secondary from analyzing your own games. And then the last one, as we talked about, of course, is list building. So those are the 6 areas of bolt action that I would encourage players to focus on getting better as a section. Go this event, I want to get better at damage control. This event, I want to get better at deployment. This event, I want to get better at scoring objectives. And these are all things that individually are sufficient to be better at bolt action.
Just as we said earlier, that it is work to do this. So don't walk into every game going, okay, these are the 6 points that I need to improve every time. You need to actually just pick a couple and make that your focus point for a few matches.
For an event, at least,
and that's really going to start improving you. And we listed quite a few, but it starts with deployment. Your actual positioning is going to dictate what you're going to do for the most of the game.
Correct.
It might seem as something that's a little bit, I just put my figures in cover and I'm going to be okay, and then I can capitalize on what makes sense on the battlefield. But it's you're going to need to know how to do it for any miniatures game that you're going to play.
Largely.
And it's an easy one that you can reset in your mind. You can get a whiteboard out and try this stuff and go, okay, maybe not, and then go back and see what you can do. Obviously, the terrain's going to dictate it every time. But that's a really easy one to start with.
Something I've found, like with deployment especially, that helps me. Here's some homework, right? For those who are like, oh, where do I start? Here's something fun that I found, because during the Lorraine game, Gorchin comes up to me, he's like, oh, so you've been researching tank destroyer doctrine, because of the way I was playing. I had all my tank destroyers coming on outflank, getting like rear shots on tanks and all that. And I'm like, no, never heard of it. I have no idea. But it made me think. I'm like, what a great idea. Look at what is the doctrine. And so I've just been researching all of that, like the fire and maneuver stuff with the Americans, and like just learning all these how different doctrines worked in that era, and then also trying to look at modern doctrines as well.
Yeah.
And it's fun.
Yeah.
Like all of us here are nerds for like
Military history. to some
military
degree.
history.
Yeah.
So you get to do something that's fun and get better at a game that is fun. It's it's complete weird.
Just in case I needed to paint myself with a bigger brush, I actually just bought a copy of The Art of War with full commentary and analysis.
I was about to say The Art of War.
Yeah, and so it's interesting that you talk about doctrines. Just as an aside, if people want source material, all of the US field manuals of World War II are actually public information. And there are a lot of guys who have accrued that information and distilled it. So there's a guy on YouTube who's actually read and analyzed and explains the whole US World War II GI handbook, all of the different tactics they use, how you're supposed to lead a squad assault, a platoon assault. So all of that sort of stuff, if for nothing else but curiosity, is actually available. And if that's not really your thing, if you're like me, you like primary source material, the field manuals are all available. They're all coded FM-2 numbers -1 other number, or 2 other numbers, depending on which one you are. I think the infantry field manual is FM-17. That might be the tank one. Somebody will have to check me on that one. But as we said, we want to move on to the take-home thing. So we talked about all these individual skills, all of these other things that you need to be able to do and apply and look at. The question is, okay, that's all well and good, HMG, but how? And so that's a really good question. And the important thing is here, what we're actually talking about here is mindset. The mindset that you want to have is often called the beginner's mindset. And it's this idea that you always have something to learn. And more importantly, the key thing about the beginner is I know the fraction that I know is smaller than the fraction that I don't know. And if you can have that mentality or take that stance, anytime you go to analyze something, you will actually analyze things much further and much more thoroughly. If that then confirms your previous thoughts, I would just ask you to double check you're not falling into confirmation bias. And if you're not, then you're golden. But the important thing is here is, we've talked about the self-critique. Use that to analyze your own decisions that you've made in a game. That's really important. It's learning from yourself. Now, the problem with learning from yourself is that you will only ever know about mistakes that you know are mistakes.
Yes.
I know that sounds like a really obtuse thing to say, but those mistakes are known knowns. The difference between somebody who's very bad at chess and a grandmaster is so far removed that if you put them next to each other, the person who has no idea has absolutely no clue what they happened and no clue what they did wrong. And that is true to some extent in bolt action. It is true to some extent in many extents in many different fields.
Yeah.
So that brings us to the second point is using your skills of analysis, not on yourself, but on your opponent's decisions and all the things that they made. Now, what that means is every single game has suddenly become twice as much homework.
Yeah.
Right? If you really want to get better.
Homework, it's okay.
Yeah. It's not about going, okay, these are all the decisions that I made, but what are all the decisions that my opponent makes?
Yeah.
And which one of them did I actually influence?
Yeah.
And that's a really, really important thing that you will most often actually get wrong.
The other one, just on that as well, is what of my opponent's decisions, for their sake, meant nothing to me.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's actually really good that you've brought that up, because that's something that a lot of people I find get blindsided in many competitive environments.
Yep.
Is what are the things that I actually should be reacting to?
Yes.
Because if you talk about MOBAs, if you talk about fencing, if you talk about martial arts, there's a lot of things where you have to react to everything that your opponent is doing. And that might be a short way to make a big jump, but it will hurt you in future progress.
Yeah.
You don't have to react to everything that your opponent's doing, but you have to make a decision about whether or not you're reacting.
Yeah.
Is make your decisions conscious, both in the proactive and in the reactive. And when you put all that together, you'll be able to grow quite rapidly, because you're not just analyzing yourself, you're also analyzing your opponent. And because we've just said the mindset you should have as a beginner is assume your opponent is at worst slightly better than you, if not a lot better than you.
Yeah.
Because the game is complex, because there are 6 different facets to the game as we've summarized them.
Yeah.
there will always be somebody out there who is better at you in at least one of those categories.
Yeah.
And if you come across the table, if you come across an opponent at a table and you think you are better out of them out of 5 out of 6 categories, I would very much encourage you to refresh your beginner's mindset.
Yeah.
Because you haven't brought the right mentality to learn.
Yeah.
Right? Just because you are better 99% of that time, that 1% you'll make a wrong decision.
On the flip side, you're talking about where you might be quite strong in one of the six aspects that we've talked about. Obviously, there's more. We've tried to just come up with things that are important focus points.
We've sliced the game in those 6 pieces. That doesn't mean that's the only way to slice it. Yeah.
Definitely. But, you may win the game, but that person is better at positioning. So you should have a look at how they did that and why. Or whatever else. If they're, maybe you got the objectives, but you lost 90% of your force to do that. Will that carry over into another game that doesn't have those same objectives?
Yeah.
If you play the same way, pretty much.
And so that brings us on to the next point is use
and was it the right decision?
And exactly.
Yeah.
Use the community. Just like Jackson does when he puts up those excellent tactics posts on Facebook, there is an incredible amount of opinions, an incredible amount of analysis that is actually performed when those questions come up. Take the time to read them and get involved. Learn from those other people, learn from those opinions. And then this brings to the next point is aerate your own, right? The thing about all of this is you will come up with ideas, you will come up with analysis and critiques, and you will have summaries of everything that you do. Save them, share them. Yeah. Whether you do that in your social group, whether you do that with somebody who you've decided is the better player, or if you do that publicly, like I do with my list building, like Jackson does with his tactics, and everybody else chimes in. These are really important things to get better at it. You might go in so far as saying it's a peer review from the field of science. It's the same thing. Now, the important thing about that is you need to ultimately have a hypothesis or a statement at the end. And the best way to do that is have your statement first and then test it. Go, I think this unit is overpowered. And then you go, well, I'm going to analyze it. I think this list is overpowered. I'm going to analyze it. I think this mission is garbage and pointless and has no player agency. I'm going to analyze it, right? And so if you find yourself that these things are all really challenging, is take a break. And I don't mean stop doing it, but I mean take a break, a mental break from that particular thing. We've all had games that we've walked out of and we've just been completely pissed off at the result. You are not thinking straight. Do not analyze it.
Yeah.
I am not good enough.
Do not analyze it.
I am not.
That's it. That's the only message.
I am not stable enough, mentally, to analyze a mission in between events, in between missions at a tournament. Not to the level that I can a social game or anything like that, because I am so focused on what I need to do next. I literally just go, that was that result. Is there a quick lesson I can take from this? Compartmentalize it. Okay, it's earned me this amount of points, X win, X losses, X draws. Where do I want to be in this tournament? What do I have to do in my next 2 games? Don't worry about 3 games. Don't worry about game 3 and 4. Worry about game 2 and crack on. And then, I can't do it in a tournament. I can't do it fast enough. I can't do it. There's too much pressure. There's too much other things going on. But that's because I'm there trying to get better. I'm there trying to win. So I have a lot of other pressures that I put on myself. But I'm not, I don't feel negative about it. If I lose, oh well, it's a loss. I play Bolt Action. I'm on a Bolt Action podcast, but it's not who I am. Believe it or not, my personality has at least one other dimension. Perhaps not more, but there's at least one other dimension to it.
At least 2-dimensional.
At least 2-dimensional.
When it comes to learning from other players, I think it's really important because there are games where you have played to the best of your ability. That you go, I executed this very well. I put a lot of thought process into it. I actually don't know where I went wrong. You need to talk to that opponent.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's where you're really going to learn something that you just didn't fathom before.
It actually touches on essentially another part, which is the use of not just the community, but almost a mentor style figure. And I probably want to indulge a little bit of my personal story in this. So when I was growing up and learning war games, learning strategy games, I used to play with my dad and his brothers. and there was no mercy, which is why I think
Are you the youngest of?
So I was the eldest son.
Okay.
But it was my dad and his brothers.
I see.
So
okay.
I was already fighting behind a generational gap.
I was going to say, I've got 2 older brothers. I know what no mercy feels like.
Yeah, but it's a little worse. And all 3 of them, quite sound thinkers in playing things, and all had an element of military training and stuff. And so the war games that we would play, they would go, well, this is how they teach you to do it, so this is what we're going to do. And so there were certain things that I'd go and do, and I'd be like, I'm going to do this because I think it's a good idea, and they go, and then just wipe me out basically. So that was my first basis of, and don't get me wrong, I loved every second of it, but the reality is that when I came to play wargaming proper, for a little bit of time, it was me trying to figure it out myself and just have fun with friends, and I got into that community space. But I absolutely reached a point where I went, I feel like I can play better than what I'm playing, because I'm looking at things going, I know that was a mistake, and I know that was something that I could have done wrong, but I couldn't spot it at the time I was coming up to it. And so don't be afraid to reach out to some of the players in your community. Not all of them are going to be able to facilitate in the same place, but some of them, like myself, are going to be in a spot where if you reach out and go, hey, I've come across this problem, I don't really know what to watch out for. Like, I now find myself, I'm giving information back to players, like all through our community when they come and ask me about stuff. So much so to the point that those players are now mentoring other players, because they are able to go, well, actually, Dan's been able to offload a bunch of experience to me, and I've started to learn and use that. Now I can help other people. And that's not meant to sound more humanitarian than what it really is. It's still toy soldiers, but the reality is we have we leverage quite a healthy network in Perth across all the different game systems, where we have this sort of buddy mentor relationship where you can come to players and go, I know you're better than me. A lot of these systems have rankings, and so you're further up the chart and on the ranks. So what am I missing? What are the things I need to think about? Sometimes those players will even go to the point of, well, I tell you what, come and have a game with me. And we'll go to that next step and try and figure out what are the things that you seem to be missing. And you bring something that you think is going to be, fair but hard to play with. And I want you to play as hard as you can against me. I want you to play as if we're playing for $10 million, and I want you to bring your A game and fight as hard as you can, and just work with what the dice and the games have got. Certainly in my previous experience with some of the other 40K players, I've had those interactions with them and gone, let's play down and be super serious. And the learnings that I've got out of there on, things that I thought I was good at, I naturally thought, I'm like, no, I know what I'm doing in this space, and, bolt action was the same. And, I play games now with, like against Russ or the Monday Night Crew, or against, Matt, or against, or even, to be honest, some of the newer guys coming up through our ranks in the event scene now who are getting on board. And they all challenge me in ways that, because they play differently, and they approach the game differently. And but we wouldn't have any of that if we weren't actually taking the time to engage and actually bounce those ideas back and forth for one another.
Yeah. Chances are who you talk to is passionate about the game themselves. And they'll want to try and help improve. And in fact, in mentoring someone else, you are learning aspects that you might have naturally not thought about.
That's, it was going to be our next point is find a mentor if you don't have one. Failing that is use the community as your mentor. The thing about, like, whenever you talk about something, whenever you have to teach it to somebody else, if you actually engage with that conversation, you'll find that some of the stuff that's in your head but not conscious comes out. And you will learn in that process as well. And that, again, just circles back to having that beginner's mindset. Just because somebody has decided that you are a better player than they are, first off, that doesn't have to be true, right? It's a perspective. And second of all, use that opportunity to learn from them, right? Because they will be better at another part of the game than you are. And sometimes that might just be straight math, because a pretty big part of the game is math. And have that mentor. And this all really brings us down to the last point is playtest. If you can't talk about your ideas on Facebook or whatever, if you can't have conversations with your mentor or whatever, play those ideas out on the board, and I would actually encourage you to do that first. But there's a lot you can figure out off the table. There's many more learnings to be had on the table. So just get out there, and play those games, and don't, if you want to get better, that is, well, big caveat, is if you actually want to get better, don't just play, have intentional practice.
Yeah.
And as we said before, that doesn't mean playing your hardest at every game, but it means bringing your best thinking toolbox to the game afterwards, at least, if not during.
It's like I said it last episode as well, and you got really mad at me. The like scientific process. I know this isn't.
I didn't get mad at you. I was just disappointed, Tyler. I was just disappointed.
But yeah, like if you keep practicing something and keep testing things, you're going to find the constants that work and the variables that keep changing.
Yes.
Science?
Somewhat.
Yeah.
and this goes back to the list building thing that we talked about, is that people will go, if something doesn't work, they throw the baby out with the bathwater and start again. Sometimes that's necessary, but that is not necessary after your first failure, and it's not necessary after your first decision. If you want to play test something, as Dan suggested, don't just try it once. Try it 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. And the expression is n equals 3. If you haven't done the same thing 3 times, you don't have evidence or data, you have anecdotes. Do it at least 3 times because you can actually get an average. And so that might be a little bit much for bolt action just because the game's recursive. You know, one game, you might do the same shooting thing 12 times. So like some of those things...
You can work within it.
Yeah. It's not strictly n equals 3 games, but I think it's a pretty good rule of thumb. And then the next time you move on to your next set of 3 games, only change one thing. Otherwise, it's not an experiment or you're not testing an idea. You're just throwing the baby out with the bathwater and you're starting your experiment all over again.
Yep.
So there is something to be said for trying out lots of different things really quickly to try lots of different mechanics, but that puts the load on you doing your homework afterwards.
Yes.
If you want to learn from that, you might not necessarily have to take meticulous notes about each game, but you have to have really good memory. You have to analyze each game if you want to learn like that, if you want to learn wide before you learn deep.
Yeah. And if you are an experienced player, don't think that what we're talking about doesn't apply to you just because we reference beginner a lot. So I was saying to these guys off camera, there's a lot that I still learn from playing games. And like there are list builds and types that I'm trying to go, in my head, this feels like it should work, but I haven't quite figured out exactly the hows and the whats of where I need to go for the missions, for the damage prevention, for all the deployment stuff. And before I unleash those things upon the world, I have to have an idea of what those things are going to be like. And so it will come to a phase of where I start play testing that in game. And I may find that it's horrible.
Absolutely.
That it is a case of like actually one of those things where on paper this looks amazing, but on real world application against any opponent that has a rationally sane idea of how to do things, it's dumb. It just doesn't work. But I could also go the other way and my opponents could be like, I just don't know how to deal with that. Yeah. And then you've got a whole different beast that you got to deal with. But because you can be seen to be a win at all cost, gamey, hardcore like player simply because your first 3 test games hypothetically you're against 3 different opponents and they went, I just don't know. Again, probably not the time to scrap the list. Probably about, okay, well, this is how it works. This is what I would suggest to counter. If you're really up for the challenge, this is how I suggest you counter it. What I think I'd struggle with. Now let's run that game again, and you will learn things about what's going on.
And like the wider you can spread that net of who you can talk to and who you can play against, the better you're gonna get. Like
for sure.
The faster you'll get better. Yeah,
and
for sure.
Like because I find Gorchin always talks about it, he's like tanks, no good, work around them, you'll be fine. Like basically, right? That's all Gorchin says.
And this is coming from somebody who loves tanks.
yeah, exactly. But like I took my Panther. And people did not know how to deal with it.
Tyler was so happy.
I was so happy. Because like I'd had Gorchin in my ear for months being like, people just work around tanks. You just work around tanks. But that's because Gorchin works around tanks. Like, it's not the wider community. So what I mean by that is like things that work on some people aren't always going to work on other people. And that's another thing you should keep in mind when you're practicing and like the whole n equals 3 thing. That's another variable is your opponent.
That's
absolutely
right.
It is. Yeah, for
absolutely.
sure.
Yeah, I would recommend in any sort of playtesting that you don't just play the same player. Even if that player is exceptionally good or has multiple armies, you actually want the wider sampling across different patterns of thought, and you won't actually get that with the same individual.
Yeah.
It might look like you are, but you actually won't be. Like I play my lists differently with the way that they're built, but I generally still navigate around a certain way of playing.
Yeah.
You want to break that mold and have it spread, as you said, cast that net as far as you can.
Yeah.
Thanks for checking in with us again. Hopefully this is a good guide to getting a little bit better at bolt action. Plenty to think about. My name is Jacob.
I'm Daniel.
Gorchin.
And I'm Tyler.
So I just wanted to put a thank you out to Good Games Rockingham for hosting us for this episode. They've actually done quite a lot for us in the past. We are regularly here for, I guess, every Sunday or so for the RHG Rockingham Historical Gamers.
Yeah.
But yeah, big thank you to the store for letting us use the space. And everybody out there that is watching us, thanks for supporting us. Please put a like, comment, subscribe, follow us on YouTube at Western Tabletop. If you're listening to our audio versions, you can find us on Spotify. You can find us on Apple iTunes and Google Podcasts as well. And yeah.
There's also the email as well.
Okay,
If
the
people
email
want to get
as
in,
well.
in contact with us. What's the email
Yeah,
address?
so if you want to contact us via email, you can get to us at historicalminiaturesgamers@gmail.com. I think that's our email address. And yeah, look, it's any questions that are related to obviously the podcast content or what you want to see or what you want to do. Like we're more than willing to work in ideas. We've already had a couple of suggestions through Facebook and stuff for some of the content, and we're trying to get to that as quick as we can. But it's about what we're doing here in Perth and what we find fun and and all the different things that we can tell you. But just let us know.
And that's not just for the podcast. You can send us other things that we are a YouTube channel. We want to do more things about battle reports, reviews on all kinds of game systems. So if there's anything that you want to see us do, please reach out to us on that email or on our social media, etc.
We're actually doing something for that. You might be able to see, just like you'll see little bits of houses. I don't think, you see like bits of the grass mat. We'll get to that. It's a little sneak peek for what's coming next.
And finally, we're going to be launching a merch store. So we're going to have some t-shirts that'll be themed to Western Tabletop.
I'm going to put pictures on Gotchin's face here.
We'll have shirts themed to HMG and Western Tabletop. I'm thinking some funny things like Pink Panther, an acronym is an initialization with a picture of a BAR. Anything that you want to put out there. Any
Science process.
Science question mark.
Needless to say, we're going for humor, but we'll try and relate things to the episodes and how things have been done and our personalities as they're developing. So some of it, if it's
all 2 dimensions for some of us,
or 2 dimensions, yeah. So there's certain things which appear like out of sync and stuff. They may have some different meanings, obviously, to what we're doing. But yeah, we just want to. For starters, we can avoid wearing the same shirts.
That'd be good. But just keep in mind that this is just a whole community thing. We don't have any budget behind this. So any help that you can provide to us, please do. I'm not e-begging here, but apparently likes and subscribes helps us in some way. So if you can do it, that would be awesome.
Yeah, but even just contacts as well. Like if you know people that are in Perth that have helped you guys out to do things, we're always on the lookout for local community people because that's largely what we're doing. So any way we can support local, especially at a time like now, is very important for us all. So just hit us up.
Okay, thanks for checking in.
Thanks everyone.
See you next time.